Hey Team Absolution fans, this is the 6th Ranger of Team Absolution here, and today we're going to be doing a deck profile of Deletors, the deck that I took to Richmond a few weeks back, so stay tuned. So, welcome to Team Absolution fans. This is my Deletor deck profile. This is the deck that I took to Richmond back in mid-January or so and placed top 8th with before we decided to split top 8 so everyone could go home. I would like to forewarn everyone that this deck is not a conventional Deletor build. This is my personal build that I took to Richmond, and so I'll be explaining my deck choices as well as why I decided to take this particular deck to Richmond, and why it is that this deck will not likely see any play post-Stargate. So look forward to a new deck profile once the new Stargate releases comes out, because this is very much not the aggro build that many Deletor players are used to. So let's get started. First things first, you see that my Deletor is Flutter Deletor Zweege, grade 0. Forerunner, and then when this card is retired from rearguard for the cost or effect of your skill, if your opponent's Vanguard is deleted, you can look at the top card of your deck, call it to R, and if you call a card with Deletor in its name, you put this card into your soul, and then countercharge 1. So obviously this is a great card for a lot of the sack effects that Deletors has. It countercharges 1, goes into your soul for any soul effects that you want to use, it calls the top card of your deck. This is a mainstay in pretty much all of the aggro Deletor builds, most of which run 3 or 4. I only run 1 for reasons which I'll get into a little bit later, so we'll go and put that to the side for now. So to start off with, the main boss unit of the deck, we run 4 of Dark Jet Deletor, Gray End. This is your primary grade 3 ride. You want to be on this guy anytime you go into the mid game, and even really if you're going into a combo, you probably still want to go into this guy because his counterblast cost is reasonably cheap. So his skill: act, counterblast 1, card with Deletor in its card name, and choose 2 of your rear guards with Deletor in their card names and retire them. Delete your opponent's Vanguard. So you turn their Vanguard face down, their base power becomes 0 until the end of the turn, until the end of their next turn, essentially. And the second skill, when your G unit with Deletor in its original card name strides, you can reveal the top card of your deck. And if it's a card with Deletor in its card name, you call it to R, or if it is not a Deletor unit, you put it into your drop zone. If you call a card, then you choose one of your units and it gets plus 2k until end of turn. So you don't have to choose the unit that you called. You can actually just choose your Vanguard or any other unit you have on the field to give plus 2k power. Then your opponent chooses 2 cards from his drop zone and binds them face down, Banish Delete. Obviously this is a pretty standard stride enabler or stride base you want to be going into. Because you stride, you get a free unit that you can use for deletes later. It's a great all-around card. The delete skill on grade 3 is quite useful if you're trying to work with the combo, but it's a little expensive because the counterblast will get refunded anyway, but you have to sacrifice 2 units compared to 1, as we'll see in this next unit coming up, the backup grade 3. So the backup grade 3 run in the deck, I run 3 of this one. It is Docking Deletor Gray On. This skill, this Vanguard has a skill: act, counterblast 2 cards with Deletor in its name, and choose one of your rear guards and retire it. Delete your opponent's Vanguard. Confirm this, and then you delete your opponent's Vanguard, and they choose a card from their drop zone and bind it face down. Banish Delete 1. Additionally, when this card is ridden on grade 3, the opponent Banish Deletes 2, although it's usually not relevant in most matchups, with one pretty big exception. So this card is actually, for now, generally a better card you want to go into for a grade 3 combo turn, which is what a lot of other Deletor decks do, because the counterblast 2 cost might be hefty, but you only have to retire 1 rear guard, meaning that when you go into given combos later, which when you go into a given combo, which I'll explain in just a little bit, you can save some of your starters and stand triggers for more top checking later. But with the new set coming out, this card is pretty much getting power creeped. So it's a great backup grade 3 ride. You don't want to ride this ever if you're going second, meeting your first stride, because you'd rather be striding, especially against a lot of clans that have really good G-Guard against you. But given that riding grade 3 is so important in this deck, you're going to want to ride this if it's the only grade 3 you have in hand. But it's not ideal. So moving on to the grade 2s, we're running one of the first big changes from all the other Deletors builds. We're running a full complement of Juxtaposed Deletor Gale. So here's a cute little card. It's a 2K. It's a grade 2 9K that says, when this unit is placed on rearguard circle, if your opponent has a deleted Vanguard, choose one of your opponent's rearguards in the front row and lock it. Okay, so it's Photon. That's great. I don't see a lot of people running this card because it sort of takes a lot of space and it's a one-time use effect. But I found it useful in the metagame that I play in because there's not a lot of resist yet, but there is a lot of rearguard attacking from things like Overlords and other Chaos builds. So being able to, and ZTB as well, so being able to lock one of the front row units against them is actually really useful. As just an aside, you can get some really hilarious things with this card. As I can tell you from one of my Richmond games against a ZTB player, he header-rounded one of my 16k units away from the field. I shuffled it back into the deck, top deck the card. It's Gale, lock your rearguard, and he was very sad. So it's not exceptional, but it's really good in a meta that has a lot of decks that don't have exceptionally good unlock options and really rely on having those rearguard columns open for getting advantage or getting extra attacks off. This is probably one of the first cards you want to cut if you're going to go to any other build of Deletors. Next, obviously, we're running the full complement of Lie Down Deletor Given. So Lie Down Deletor Given, one of the most infamous cards in all of any Deletor deck, essentially. Skill, auto, counterblast one card with Deletor in its card name, retire this unit, and then choose 4 other rearguards with Deletor in their card names and retire them as well. At the end of the battle that this unit attacked a Vanguard, if you have a grade 3 Vanguard with gray in its card name, you can do this cost. And if you do, stand all of your Vanguards. So essentially what this card says is, you swing a rearguard, then you swing your Vanguard, then you swing Given. At the end of the battle that Given attacks, you counterblast 1, sacrifice your entire board, and stand your Vanguard again. What makes this card so especially threatening in the Deletor build is that obviously we have the starter and the stand trigger that we'll come to later that say when this unit is retired for a cost or effect of a card, aka Given, you get to call the top card of your deck, and in case of the stand trigger, give it power. And so what happens is you get a rearguard attack, then a Vanguard attack, then another rearguard attack, and then you call maybe two or three more cards off the top of your deck, you get another rearguard attack, and then a Vanguard attack, and then another rearguard attack, all while your opponent is sitting at 0 power. So it's one of the most devastating kill style turns in the game. But as I've found, it turns out that it gets a lot worse the unluckier you get. Because if your opponent checks triggers, well, then you're really sad because suddenly they're sitting at 5 or 10k and your kill turn isn't as good anymore. Or if your opponent is good and doesn't give you damage for, say, clipping to your Evo, then it's not necessarily consistent that you'll draw into your starters or your stand triggers by the time you need them for this grade 3 combo turn. And so I moved my deck choice away from the combo build because of all this, because in my local meta and in this regional meta, as I felt, there are a lot of people that would just simply not deal you a lot of damage early, meaning the clipping deleter is really bad for combo. And then later on, if there's a lot of overlords in this area, and so you cannot do this combo into overlords if they're sitting at grade 3, because all they have to do is use a single denial griffin on your Given when it attacks, and then suddenly your turn is now over. You get no advantage, and then you probably lose. So, given that there were so many overlords I was terrified of in my local meta, I don't play the combo build because it's essentially a coin flip to see if you go first. And then after the coin flip to see if you go first, it's then another coin flip to see if you actually get the cards you need to finish the combo. And I might say that I'm a good player sometimes, but I'm not a lucky player. And honestly, if you're not a lucky player, the combo is not going to be very, very good for you until the new Stargate booster comes out. So because of that, you still run the 4 givens because it's incredible when you get the combo off. You just go bam, 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 and then your opponent's dead at grade 3 or a grade 2 even. Or sometimes like you can push them to 5 and they have to ride grade 3, they have maybe 2 cards in hand, and then they're not going to come back from that after you go into your strides. But if you don't get the combo off, then Given becomes much more and more useless as the game goes on, especially with all the G-guards like Header Around and Denial Griffin out there that can retire your rear guards. You lose a single rear guard, and Given is dead. So, knowing that, a lot of people run the 10k deleter because of top checks and 10k hits for good numbers. Instead, I run a full complement of Forbid Deletor, Zak Awayland. So Zak Awayland, one of the most terrifying cards that you never want to see on your opponent's side of the field, because this card will always force cards out of your hand, no matter what, unless you've got a very specific build to counter it somehow. So act, once per turn, rearguard. Counterblast 1 card with Deleter in its card name. If your opponent's Vanguard is deleted, then until the end of the turn, this unit gets plus 2,000 power and red text when this unit attack hits a Vanguard. If your opponent is a grade 3 Vanguard, then they cannot stride during the next ride phase, meaning they're not allowed to normal stride. Superior striding during the main phase and other weird things like that is still okay, but you're not allowed to stride during the stride section of your ride phase. So this becomes essentially an 11k versus your 0. A lot of people say that this card is not as good as people think it is, and honestly I agree with them, because if you're a lucky player, you don't need this card. It's really bad when you call it up the top deck. If you don't have Counterblast, which a lot of people will deny you, it's not nearly as good. It has to hit, obviously, so it's not amazing. But what I found what it does is that it forces your opponent to drop cards to guard it. You have to guard this. If you do not guard this, you do not stride next turn. And if you are not striding in this game with a deleted Vanguard, unless you are on something that can work on its own, like say Dragonic Overlord the Legend, or other grade 3s that work without having to stride, then getting hit by this card is a death sentence. So basically, it's 11k, it forces 15k shield by itself. You put a booster behind it, it becomes maybe 18k, and then if you hit a stand trigger, you've just forced something like 35 to 40k shield out of their hand because they're sitting at 0. So they have to drop a lot of shield to guard this card. Its obvious weakness is, of course, getting Denial Griffined or Header Arounded or somehow other way removed from the field. So, to be entirely honest, it works better in a meta that doesn't have removal options like that. So it's great against things like Chaos, surprisingly, because you have plenty of unlock options in this deck. But it's probably going to replace in the next iteration of this deck, or you might run 1 or 2 of it, because it's such a powerful threat by itself. But it would not work in a combo build, which is why I've put this in my quote-unquote mid-range build of the deck. You go into your stride, you call this out, your stride gives it some extra power, you get delete off, you get some extra power somewhere, you do your triple check, and you get some stand triggers, and suddenly they're staring at this card, and you can do some really cheeky plays, like they have 1 damage, they really want to take some damage for Counterblast. You attack with this card, they're like, okay, I have to guard this because otherwise I can't even use my Counterblast. Then you swing Vanguard, okay, that's fine. Stand, oh no, now I have to guard Zachary again. It forces a lot of really bad decisions on the opponent as to like, I have to guard this, how am I going to guard this? It just makes the rest of it makes their next turn much, much worse. It makes your attacks a lot better, but it does sort of generate a reliance on, oh, am I going to check the stand trigger? But But if you check the stand trigger, you're pretty much winning that game at that point. That's exactly that. So that's my full complement of grade 2s. Some of you might be wondering, hey, why doesn't he run any Clipping Deleter Evos? Well, like I mentioned earlier, Clipping Deleter Evo, which is Counterblast 2, if your opponent's Vanguard is deleted, search your deck for any card not named Clipping Deleter Evo and call it to R. It's great for consistency, but like I mentioned, in my meta, a lot of players actually just deny damage because they know that they can recover late game as long as they survive the early game deleter rush. And I feel like that is actually what a lot of combo style deleters run into, is that deleters doesn't generate advantage very well. And so if they don't have the necessary counterblast to work with to get their combo as efficient as they can, then, you know, move on to first or second or third stride, and they just fall further and further and further behind. And so Evo's a nice card, but I personally didn't see the need for it in this particular build. Moving on to grade 1s. We have the full 4 complements of Higher Deleter, 4-1. This is your deleter stride fodder. So in your hand, if you have a Vanguard with deleter in its name, and you're striding into a stride with deleter in its original card name, so no, you can't use this for Amnesty Messiah, then you can use this as a regular stride fodder. It gets grade +2. And second effect, auto, when this card is discarded for the cost of stride, you can counterblast 1 as long as you're striding into a deleter, and then you can call this card to rearguard. So essentially, a lot of your strides require you to sacrifice one or two or more of your rearguards in order to delete your opponent's Vanguard. So, counterblast 1, you get a free fodder unit to call to the field and use it for sacrifice. I mean, it's good. I run 4 because this is the mid-range build of the deck, and so you need to stride. And given that the deck only runs 7 grade 3s, having a grade 1 stride fodder at 4 means that your striding becomes a lot more consistent, and it generates itself as a unit for you to sacrifice, which is really relevant when you're in top deck mode late game and have no cards to call. It's a good card overall. Then we have 4 copies of Ill Fate Deleter, Drown. This is one of the more expensive old cards from the old set, and I've met a lot of people that either agree or disagree with running this card. So Drowned reads, put this into Soul and discard a card from your hand. You can pay this cost at the end of the battle that this boosted a unit with a Vanguard, specifically, with Deleter in its card name. So your opponent's Vanguard does not have to be deleted for the skill to go off, which is very important, actually. If you pay this cost, then you draw 2 cards. So you put Drown to the Soul, discard 1 card, and so you draw 2. So you cycle a booster and some other card for 2 cards off the top of your deck. What this does is it gives you consistency for your ride. If you draw this card early, you can just throw it behind your Vanguard, swing in, cycle a card from your hand for 2 more cards out, right? It has another ability that also says, well, after you draw those 2 cards, your opponent chooses 1 card from your drop zone and binds it face down with Banish Delete. It's not super relevant, but it might be relevant in a few niche cases that I'll explain later on. So this card gives you consistency for your rides. Let's say you open up a hand and it's like grade 1, grade 1, grade 2, grade 2, grade 2. Well, that's a great deleter hand, but you really need that grade 3, right? Well, if you get Drown, you can start cycling some of those extra grade 2s or grade 1s away to try to dig deeper for one of your 7 grade 3s in the deck. It really helps out because you don't have a stride fodder that will actually search it out for you. Alternatively, if you're drawing nothing but triggers and you need attackers, then you can use Drown to cycle your triggers away and draw extra cards. Or if you like your hand the way it is, then just keep Drown on the field. It's totally fine. Leave it as a booster, and then whenever you have an extra card in your hand that you don't need, like a second Give-In, or like extra Zachary Lads, or some other cards, then just shove into the Soul, discard your card away, draw 2 new cards. It's really versatile, and that's why it's a solid 4 in the deck right now. Moving along, we then have, obviously, the full complement of your Perfect Guard, which is Remove Deleter Igalga. It's pretty standard Perfect Guard. Sentinel, choose a unit with your choose a card from your hand, discard it. It specifically guards Deleter units. It guards cards with Deleter in its card name, so obviously you only use this in the Deleter deck. But its second ability is the more interesting one. So, auto, drop zone. Bind this card face down, so you vanish delete your own card. When your opponent's Vanguard is deleted, you pay this cost. And if you do, you can choose one of your units and give it plus 4k until end of turn. This is, when I first saw this card, I was a little underwhelmed. I was like, oh, 4k, that's not even a stage. And then I realized that if you have an 11k and your opponent is deleted at 0, then 4k does push it up to 15 and give it another stage. Oh, what was that other card we had that's 11k? Zakuelad, you say? 15k, don't mind if I do. One of the things I will note that is important to know about this card when you're playing against deleters is the timing of the usage. It is specifically an auto effect when your opponent's Vanguard is deleted that they have to bind this. So they cannot delete your Vanguard, then call another unit, and then bind this card to give it plus 4k. The unit they give the power to must be on the field when your Vanguard is deleted and when they vanish delete this card from their drop zone. But it's incredibly versatile. You put 4k on pretty much anything, and it just gives it, generally it'll give it at least an extra stage. You have 2 or 3 of these in your drop, suddenly a plus 12k boost is nothing to scoff at if they don't have a perfect card in hand. At least one of my games was won based on just going into a stride with nothing else in hand, calling one unit, sacking it to delete, and then binding 2 of my perfect guards in the drop face down to give plus 8 to the Vanguard, and that gave it just enough power that it couldn't guard it at 5 damage. So this card's great. You wouldn't run any other perfect guard because the other deleted perfect guards are not good, but this card is really good on its own. I don't see them power creeping this card anytime soon. Finishing up the grade 1 roundup, we have one more quite controversial card that I've got in this deck. This is Ferment Deletor, Gain. So, auto, Soul Blast 1. When your opponent's Vanguard is deleted, if you have a gray Vanguard, you can pay the cost. If you do, this unit gets plus 3k, and your opponent vanish deletes 1 from their drop zone. So I've been asked, like, oh, 6 Ranger, why would you run this card over the 10k? You know, like the 10k beater on attack. Because if you call this card off the top of your deck, then it's only a 7k. Versus if you call the 10k beater, then you can attack with it and make it a 10k. And that is very true, and I don't fault any person for running the 10k beater, especially in a combo build. But as I would remind you, this build I've got here is what I call the mid-range build of the deck. And so I run this card not because it's a good attacker at 10k, but because it's a good booster. So imagine if you have this card and Zakuelad already on the field when you delete your opponent's Vanguard. You Soul Blast 1, and suddenly Zakuelad now has a 10k booster sitting behind it, while it's at 11k. So Zakuelad swings for 21, mandating a 25k shield out of your opponent if they want to guard it. If you get extra power to Zakuelad from, say, the perfect guard, it becomes 25, which mandates 30k shield. And then if you hit double stand trigger, well, you're just winning that game now, unless they have double perfect guards. So this card I use as a booster. There's a reason there's only 2 of them, and that's because the soul cost is actually a little overwhelming, but you don't use soul for anything else anyway, and all your drowns are going to get wasted in the soul if you don't do anything with them. So as a booster, this card is incredible. As an attacker, you'd want to go with a 10k beater. But again, with a mid-range build, this booster in the mid-game is ridiculously good. And there's some cheeky uses for it later on that I'll also explain when I get to the stride explanations. So, moving on to the trigger lineup, we start off with 4 crit. This is Biting Deletor Gave. It's a 4k, which a lot of people think is like, oh no, 4k trigger, that's no good. But the effect in this build is relatively good in that it is at the end of the battle that this unit boosted. As long as your opponent's Vanguard is deleted, you can put this card back on top of your deck, shuffle your deck, so your crit goes back essentially. And then you get to countercharge 1, and your opponent vanish deletes 1. The vanish delete 1 is less important than that countercharge, because you only run 1 starter in this deck. Your countercharge options are relatively limited. So at this point, it's essentially a crit that goes back and countercharges you 1. That's pretty good. I'll take it. It doesn't work with Given, because it has to go back to the deck, and Given needs to sacrifice your entire field. So don't count on it for anything along those lines. But when you're going into the mid-range plan, then it starts looking pretty good. Moving on, you have your heals. Standard heal, Taunting Deleter Gotho. This is the only Deleter heal we have right now. Sadly, Bushiro decided to give the effect heal to Starvaders in Stargate Booster, so we're going to be sitting with this heal for a while. You need to run Deleter heals, because if you top check a non-Deleter, you're going to be really, really sad. Even if it's a really good heal effect, you're still going to be running the Deleter heal. Also, it's a 5k, so it's not bad. It still hits numbers against a 0. Moving along, we run 4 stand, Cramping Deleter Eddy. So Eddy has the ability, when this unit is placed on rearguard, if your opponent has a deleted Vanguard, and you have a Vanguard with Deleter in its name, draw a card. So it cycles itself, which is pretty good. There's a lot of sort of high roll scenarios you can get with this card. If you're going into a grade 3 given combo, you can play this card, draw a card, play whatever card you get. If you draw a bunch of Eddies, you get to cycle and keep a bunch of your hand, because they're just going to get sacrificed to given anyway. If you sacrifice your starter or one of the upcoming stand triggers and then top deck this card to delete your opponent's Vanguard, well, your opponent's Vanguard actually gets deleted before this card is placed and triggered on your rearguard circle, because you have to resolve the skill. And so you actually get to draw a card, because after it's called, your opponent's Vanguard is deleted. Draw 1. So it's a free draw if you top deck it, if you're lucky, which sometimes I am not. And more importantly, you really just want stands, because stands give you a lot more pressure in this build, or really in Deletors in general, because, well, let's face it, at 0, you really don't want to see that 11k standing back up again. And then coming to the last trigger in this deck, one of the most infamous cards in the deck, it is Rendering Deleter, Efames. So, stand trigger. When this unit is retired from rearguard for the effect or cost of your card, if your opponent's Vanguard is deleted, you look at the top card of your deck, call it to R, and it gets plus 5k. This card is the bread and butter of all sacrifice effects that you have in this deck. It is great stuff. You want this on your given turn, you want this on your stride turn, you want to see this whenever you can, just not in your damage, because then you can't get it back. So you call this card, so you can just call this card down, and it cycles itself. But not only does it cycle itself, it gives plus 5k to whatever you call. That's really, really good. You call an 11k, oh, it's a 16, oh no, oh no. You call it 10k, it's a 15, oh no, oh no. And so what's better is that you can stagger this with, say, your perfect guard. And so you can call the top card, give it 5k, and then give it 4k again with your perfect guard if you're sacrificing this for your delete effects. So all around, super efficient card, great power gain. A lot of us saw this card when it first got spoiled, and we're just like, this is exactly what Deletors needed to actually be relevant. A way to get cards back after sacrificing your own units, and then also give them power. That's sweet. It's like drawing a free card. That's great stuff. So everyone runs 4 of this in their deck. Whatever your other choices for your Deletors are, you always run 4 of this card. There's no question about that. So that's the main deck. Let's go ahead and move on to our stride zone, which is, granted, relatively barren, because we don't have any really good strides just yet. Or that many good strides. We have very good ones. So our first stride, Deliberate Deleter Aldane. You can stride this G3, standard stride cost. Act, once per turn. Choose a face-down card with the same name as this card, with the same name as this unit from your G zone, turn it face up, and choose one of your rear guards with Deleter in its name and retire it. So that's your cost. If you do, delete your opponent's Vanguard, and then all of your units in the front row get plus 2k for every face-up card with the same name as this unit in your G zone until end of turn. So, quick note about this card, because I see this misplayed a lot. This is not a continuous effect. Your entire front row does not get plus 2k per face-up card in the G zone for the rest of the turn. This only applies to the units that are currently in the front row of the Deletors player field when the Vanguard is deleted. So they can't do anything sneaky like, oh, I'll sacrifice the stand trigger and then call the top. No, that doesn't work. The stand trigger doesn't trigger and resolve until after the stride resolves. So they can't do sneaky things like, oh, I'll just sacrifice this stand trigger, call the top card of my deck to the front row, give it 5k, and then another 2k. No, that doesn't work. You have to fully resolve all of your effects. So make sure you're not fooled by that. I see a lot of players getting sort of trick-seed in match vids from that sort of thing. So don't let yourself get fooled. But otherwise, this is an incredible card, right? You stride. It costs no counterblast. You have to retire just one unit, and then your Vanguard is deleted, and then the entire front row gets power. The first time you stride this, the front row gets plus 2k. The second time you stride this, the front row gets plus 6k. That's incredible. That's a lot of power. That's full stages right there. Like your 9ks, oh, now they're 11ks. Oh, second stride, oh, your 9ks, they're 15ks. You just gain stages upon stages upon stages of attack. It's great stuff. So the biggest benefit of this card is that it's free, obviously, right? You don't need any counterblast. It can deny you damage all you want. You can still go into this and delete their Vanguard. They're not getting out of that. Sure, you can't give in them, but, you know, if you're at 0 damage, I don't think you needed to give in them anyway. It's a good card. Moving along, we have an interesting number. I run 3 copies of the original Deletor Gorge. So this is the really expensive card from Vanguard Deletor from years ago. Everyone's complaining about it. And so here we go. Act. Once per turn, Generation Break 2. Counterblast 1. Choose a rearguard with Deletor in its name and retire it. If you have a heart card with Deletor in its card name, then delete all your opponent's Vanguards. Choose up to 1 rearguard in their back row and lock it, and then Banish Delete 1. Then, if your opponent has 13 cards in their bind zone face down and 4 more damage, you win the game. That's not going to happen, right? That's not going to happen. But the great thing about this card is that sometimes you don't want to go into your second Iodeum, right? Like, sometimes you're just like, oh, I don't have any good units in my hand to call, so the plus 6k power is just going to kind of get wasted. Or, you know, you want to cycle your triggers away or whatnot, and you just want a quick deleter to go into, and you have some spare counterblast. Gorge is your guy. All you got to do, counterblast 1, sack a dude, so it's Iodean, but with a counterblast 1 cost, and you don't get power. But, you know, you get to keep your Iodeans for later use. And then there's another cheeky use for this card, actually. It's one of my sort of secret strategies for going against Overlords, which thankfully I actually did not play at Richmond. But there's a cheeky strategy you can do with Gorge. So one of your biggest issues with Overlords is that they have Denial Griffin, meaning that they kill your Gibbons, they kill your Zachary lads, and then you're really sad because none of your advantages work. Well, with Gorge, now you have an actual win condition against Overlords. Because, as you recall, your grade 3 allows you to Banish Delete 2 on your stride, right? And so, with Gorge in your deck, on your first stride, you Banish Delete 2. On your second stride, you Banish Delete 4. On your third stride, you Banish Delete 7, because Gorge Banish Deletes 1 extra by itself, so you Banish Delete 7. And then on your fourth stride, you Banish Delete and go to 10 cards. Now, so fourth stride, 10 cards, you're like, oh, that's not 13. But remember, you have other cards that also Banish Delete. Your Crit Trigger Banish Deletes, Gain Banish Deletes, your Drowns, specifically, also Banish Delete 1 every time you cycle it for 2 more cards. And so, if you can survive to fourth stride against Overlords, and if you have Banish Deleted 3 cards by the time you get there, you simply win the game out of nowhere. And they're like, oh no, what just happened? I have like 12 cards in hand. How do I lose this? That's how. Because, let's face it, if Overlord gets to first or second stride against you, you're not going to win that game. It's just not going to happen. They're too consistent. But it's a sort of cheeky little way to, like, against unsuspecting Overlord players, or like, all right, the whole game's in my hand now. I've got a massive hand. There's no way I'm going to die. I've got my heals. Wait, what do you mean I just lose the game? So that's great. But otherwise, you just run this card as an extra delete, a way to delete when you go into strides if you don't want to do Iodan. Then you run one copy of Genesis Dragon, Amnesty, Messiah. And yes, this is for the Chaos matchup. Because when Chaos does things like triangle lock you, and you don't have a heal in hand, well, you really want to get those cards unlocked. Sadly, it's not great against Crisis because they're just gonna, retire one of the units you unlock. But when they triangle lock you, it's fine because, okay, you count last one, you get plus 9k in a crit, and then Chaos is like, okay, well, and if your whole field is locked, then this card is excellent, right? You get 15k, you get a crit, you unlock your entire field. The Chaos player can only retire one of them, and so it lets you get some extra attacks off when you wouldn't normally get attacks off. It's a great card. You run it as a tech. This is one of the first things you G-assist away if you know you're not facing Link Joker, obviously. And that's actually all of the strides that we have in this deck, because Deletors don't actually have very many good strides. We might see that that'll change in Stargate, but for now that's all we got. So let's move on to G-Guards. G-Guard number 1, Blaming Deletor. How do you pronounce this name? Evie Ores. So, it's a G-Guard. When it's placed on Guardian Circle, Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1. When you pay this cost, you choose your opponent's front row. So yes, it does not work on resist. You choose your opponent's front row, and they all get minus 1k for every Deletor on your Vanguard Circle, Rearguard Circle, and face up in your G-Zone. So that means that if you have a full field of 6 units, that's minus 6k to the front row. If you've strode 3 times, then that's minus 9k to the front row. And if you've used this card and have it face up in your G-Zone, it's even better. So this card gets better and better and better as the game goes on, but it's not an amazing G-Guard at the start. But obviously when you're facing down a whole field of, say, front row of restanding rear guards, this card is amazing. It's like, oh, your 16k is going to restand. Well, let me just give it minus 7, and now it can't hit me. That's great. So this card's real good. After that, again, for the Chaos matchup, and also a bit for the Messiahs and possibly other Deletors matchup, you have Genesis Beast, Destiny Guardian. You know, the classic Link Joker card. G-Guard, when it's placed on Guardian Circle, you can unlock 2 cards, and if you unlock up to 2 cards, and if you unlock 2 cards, this unit gets plus 10k. So this is the biggest shield gaining card in Link Joker right now, essentially, unless you're playing Messiahs. And so against Chaos, you run 3. If your meta is Chaos heavy, which mine sort of is, then you run 3 of these because they attack. Chaos is always going to attack you because they don't want to deck out and they need to kill you. And so you just Destiny Guardian, and they're just, oh no, I'm on stride, so I can't even retire the units you unlock. And then you Destiny Guardian them again, they're like, oh no, all of my glue ball power is gone. And so this card is incredibly necessary for your Chaos matchup. And what else are you going to run anyway? Moving along, 1 copy of Metal Element Scryu, because plus 10k for discarding a card is still relevant in this deck. It's one of the best ways to sort of get a 25k shield, even if you have to discard a card for it. Get rid of your extra grade 3s, get rid of the cards you don't need, stay alive, you know. Sometimes you don't have the block cards to unlock for Destiny Guardian, and that's where Scryu comes in. And then lastly, we have the Darkness That Lights Up Demise, Lacus Carina. The G-Flip G-Guardian, which says GB1, Counterblast 1, flip a G-Guardian for a G-Zone, turn to face up. You can choose up to 3 of your own rear guards and locks them. And if you do, your opponent chooses and locks one of his or her rear guards in the back row for each unit that you locked. So what this card allows you to do is to snipe really annoying rear guards in the back row that you don't want boosting, like say the ZTB units that go into the soul and draw them cards, or other things that you'd really just have them locked until end of turn. Or if you really want to be sort of cheeky and get some extra shield, if you have 2 heals in hand, you can Lacus Carina lock 2 of your units to lock 2 of their back row, and then Destiny Guardian to unlock your own units and get plus 10k shield later, but leaving their 2 units locked. So this unit gives you options, which is always good to have, and let's face it, the rest of this G-Zone doesn't have much to speak of anyway, up until Stargate comes out. So that's why you run Locus. So that's the entire deck. As I mentioned earlier, this is essentially the mid-range build of Deletors. It is not the aggro build that most people are used to, and as such, I am fairly confident you will not see this build anywhere unless you, dear Team Absolution fans, are the ones playing it. But I can't wholeheartedly recommend the build because I only play this build because I am one of the unluckiest people I know that play Vanguard. I don't hit trigger checks. My opponents will always hit trigger checks. I will never draw the right cards that I need, and because of this, the combo build just doesn't work for me. So if you are any sort of lucky, you will likely play the combo build of this deck. And with the release of Stargate coming up, the combo build is actually going to be the preferable build, even for an unlucky player like me. So that's what I'll be switching to. So everyone look forward to a new deck profile with updates after Galaxy Stargate comes out. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you learned something about my deck choices and how I play this game through this deck profile. And we'll probably be having some matches for this deck up on the channel sometime in the near future as well. So look forward to all that, and thanks a lot, fans. See you for the next video.